organizations were able to come to us and say, hey, we've been encrypted by Lockbit, Hive, or some of these other variants. And we're able to say, hey, through our law enforcement authorities, we have been able to obtain decryption capability and hand that to them in the middle of an incident to avoid paying $50 million in a ransom payment. In fact, we've tracked some of the numbers. We're about $750 million in ransom payments saved as a result of providing decryption capability to victims.
Today's guest is Brett Leatherman, a senior executive leading the FBI's cyber division. Brett oversees the Bureau's global cyber operations, from dismantling ransomware ecosystems to countering nation-state threats from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Welcome to the Risk Apogee, where we cut through the noise to get to the truth about risk. Cyber, physical, human. Every organization faces threats. What separates the ones that survive from the ones that don't is the decisions their leaders make under pressure. Each episode, we go inside the arena with the operators and strategists, shaping how organizations defend, adapt, and lead. This is the Risk Apogee.
Brett Leatherman, welcome to the Risk Apogee podcast.
Thanks, MK.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you again.
All right. Hey, most people out on the landscape don't really understand the FBI's role as it relates to cybersecurity investigations, even the cybersecurity landscape. So if someone's new to understanding what the FBI does exactly as it relates to cybersecurity, lay out the landscape for us. Explain the role that you play, the types of investigations that the FBI engages in, and frankly, what kind of role you play as it relates to enterprise and helping them situate their security apparatus or respond to cybersecurity threats.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's not a surprise that a lot of people are not familiar with what the FBI does in the cyber discipline. It's the newest operational work that the FBI has taken on. We just turned 118 years old. We just celebrated our birthday. And from our founding, we've been a law enforcement organization meant to pursue threats that cross state lines. Those kind of things that local, state authorities generally lack the ability, authorities, or capability to pursue. As you've seen the FBI grow over the years, the gangster era in particular, vehicles were invented and gangsters use those to go rob banks across state lines. And so, the FBI was founded with a special group of individuals to work these kind of cases called special agents. And that really allowed the federal government to conduct enforcement operation where, this kind of activity was not tied to one jurisdiction. Well, fast forward to,
So 21st century, yeah. When I joined the FBI in 1997, there was no FBI cyber division.
Yeah.
And cyber investigations, in fact, were the work of a very small number of agents who worked in the corners and basements of field offices, and it wasn't really an elevated risk or threat. That has changed significantly. Talk a little bit about how that's grown over time.
Yeah, significantly, because cyber effects now have kinetic effect, right?
Yeah.
Cyber exploitation by state actors, for example, exfiltration of U.S. intellectual property, the innovation that keeps us on the main stage, our economy is the top economy out there, is because industry continues to innovate at speeds that other countries can. So other countries want what we are building, and they want to compete with us in the market space using what they've stolen from us. And so that has become a national security issue. Cyber security in general and the cyber operational front is a national security issue. The FBI is unique in that while we were originally founded to be a law enforcement agency, we have grown to be a member of the U.S. intelligence community. So now we have law enforcement authorities to execute, through our investigations, both cyber and non-cyber investigations. But being a member of the U.S. intelligence community, we have intelligence authorities that we can bring to bear in our cyber investigations as well. And that is kind of what's unique to the FBI that nobody else really has, is we're joint law enforcement, joint intelligence community, and we can use those authorities to counter both ransomware actors as well as state-affiliated actors like China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how you balance the tension between national security responsibilities and criminal investigations that only have a nexus to a financial outcome. I remember there being a heavy emphasis around the national security effort and an adequate focus on criminal investigations. But if we look at the landscape in terms of risk, there are many, many more criminal or fraudulent-based activities that happen across the cybersecurity landscape, more so than the national security stuff. That's also the stuff that the FBI doesn't share readily. I mean, there are national security investigations that are happening all the time that we may or may not know about as the public. Is there a tension for you in terms of devoting resources to those particular areas?
There is always that tension, and you're always assessing risk, right? Because like you said, the cyber criminal threat is, the intent is monetization. It's how do we move money? How do we get money? And in the ransomware ecosystem right now, they're making a lot of money off ransomware attacks because they're hitting the underlying suppliers to healthcare. They're hitting healthcare themselves, or hitting organizations that transcend various sectors in order to compel quick and large payments. So that's a problem. That's what I see as a tactical problem to the U.S. economy. We're continuing to drive disruption operations against ransomware actors because we want to disrupt the flow of money. We want to disrupt victimization. But the danger is the nation state threat, which I look at is an existential threat to our standing as a world superpower. And that is the one that concerns me, in that the public doesn't see everything that's happening on the national security side. Criminal side is meant to be loud and proud in what they do because they want to get money and they want to get that money quickly. The nation state side is meant to be an advanced persistent threat, flying under the radar, persisting as long as they can in victim organizations for intellectual property theft through exfiltration of sensitive data, trying to identify diplomatic information that can help them understand the U.S. position, whether it's military or diplomatically. But recently, also pre-placing cyber capability on U.S. critical infrastructure. And that is a huge concern to all of us when you have a nation state who can potentially control, programmable logic controllers, or the things that term valves on and off, pumps on and off in critical infrastructure, or control the flow of energy. Because if you can disrupt that, you can disrupt a lot in our way of life here in the U.S.
So there's a lot to unpack in that response. Let's break it up a little bit. I remember, I think it was late 2014, I was in ASAC in San Francisco. First phone call I ever received about a ransomware event. I thought then that it was a novel approach for attack. So giving credit to the adversary that they had come up with what wasn't a new way, because the idea of cryptographic separation of information had been around for quite some time, but it was novel in the way that they were deploying or exploiting this particular avenue of attack. It's still happening. It ticks up and down over the years, but still happening. If you could tell enterprise stakeholders and security practitioners one or two things they absolutely should be doing in their environments to protect against ransomware, what would that be?
Yeah, to your point, like back when we were working this in 2014, we used encryption, and we still do today, to protect the confidentiality of data. Now, the actors are using it to target the availability of data, our own data, to us in industry, right? We have seen that grown significantly since 2014. It has become a multi-billion-dollar problem here and throughout the world, and we're constantly looking for ways to combat it. So when it comes to ransomware, it's about resilience. We have seen a dramatic increase in the targeting of edge devices and vulnerabilities in those edge devices. So the ransomware actors are looking to target routers, VPN appliances, various things that sit at the edge, that have had patches available to them, but are not patched on a regular basis. The other thing they're targeting is end-of-life devices at the edge. So those devices that the manufacturer has said, hey, we can no longer support this, given how old the hardware is, and organizations keep those on the network because it just works, right? And so that's where the actors are looking to target. So understanding what sits at the perimeter is incredibly important. Understanding phish-resistant multi-factor authentication is incredibly important as well, because the identity of users who have access to your environment is incredibly valuable to an actor, and they're going to target those employees who can get into your environment and leverage their credentials to escalate privilege, move laterally, and launch these kind of ransomware attacks. An incident response plan, incredibly important as well. Knowing what you're going to do, who you're going to call, hopefully the FBI early, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit about
we're going to get into that.
Is incredibly important. So having that incident response plan in place. But if there's one thing I could say to C-suite executives and boards of directors is this: have a conversation with your outside breach counsel before it even happens, because they are the gatekeeper for information often that goes to FBI, CISA, or other organizations. And you want to understand before a breach happens what data might be important to share with the FBI and why there's value in doing that, because you can get information back that helps with that hunt and the incident response that you're doing in your environment.
How do you feel about tabletop exercises?
A big fan of them. In the FBI, we tabletop everything, or we do exercises for everything. Our most high-risk things, we exercise. I'm a pilot for the FBI. I flew for the FBI for years. The amount of times I did emergency procedure training or exercises just in the event, the unlikely event we had a physical failure on the aircraft or something happened in the environment, it was an instinct that we were able to just lock in, go right to our checklist and deal with. Our SWAT teams do that all the time. High risk entries, they want to know exactly what's going to happen if a contingency happens. We are better for that in the event something happens, regardless of how unlikely it is to happen. Organizations should embrace that as well, because you start to think through, this is what we thought might happen, but through the tabletop exercise where we brought in different perspectives, it actually went right or left from here, and now we can build out our incident response plan to start to deal with that as well.
Yeah. So as you know, my experience in the FBI very similar to yours. I spent a couple of years on a few FBI SWAT teams, and I tell folks all the time that how you practice is how you're going to go to war. I will tell you though, I spent some time in enterprise as well, following the FBI. And there's a tension around taking time out to practice. How important really is this? I mean, take it down another layer around, I believe this sincerely, that if you don't practice it, you will absolutely see chaos in the event of a real world event. Maybe anecdotally, what have you seen in the way of, because you guys get to do the response stuff. You've seen organizations that practice and what their response looks like, and organizations that do not, and what their response looks like. How important is this?
It is incredibly important. And the reason I say that is the FBI does cyber incident response from a law enforcement perspective 365 days a year. So every day, as the head of FBI Cyber Division, I'm getting briefed on what is happening throughout the country related to exploitation of industry and companies and government agencies and critical infrastructure. Those organizations that tabletop exercise are well more prepared to quickly react to the chaos of a breach, because it is chaos in the first few days of a breach. And tabletopping those events, and I would say bringing the FBI in early, also brings calm to that chaos. What I would say is organizations that don't are not thinking through the contingencies. They often communicate on platforms that are compromised or likely compromised by bad actors. They are deleting data or logs quickly because they're wiping machines that should probably be imaged first or preserved, either for civil or criminal use. And there's a lot of mistakes that are made because you haven't thought through the implications. Tabletop exercises are also not meant for just the network defense team to be a part of. And I find when network defense teams alone are part of those, they're still better prepared than those that don't do it, but they're not as well prepared as when you involve the C-suite executives, the board of directors, outside counsel, law enforcement, physical security for the organization, where we bring everybody in who has a potential role within that incident response.
Yeah. There's a particular inoculation that happens in a tabletop exercise when you bring in the C-suite, other decision makers. And I think the advice that I would give folks is centered around the idea that if you've been prompted to what a decision in that scenario might look like, you actually will make a better decision regardless of what your response is during the tabletop. You'll make a better decision in a real world scenario if you've at least thought about it, practiced it, wondered who you need to turn to for advice and counsel, and doing it in a notional based scenario allows you the space and freedom to make mistakes, quite frankly. And that's what you don't want to replicate in a real world scenario.
That's where you get it. In aviation, we want to make mistakes when we're practicing, not when the actual crisis hits. Same with the SWAT teams. And what I would say is, we had a tabletop exercise with the board of directors for a Fortune 500 organization, where the board of directors came in and they had a half-day scenario related to a ransomware incident. And they brought in, the organization brought in an FBI agent who I think they thought was an actor to actually provide advice and guidance based on, our expertise in this area. And I remember one of the board members at the very end of the tabletop said, that actor was so realistic. I wish the FBI would actually do it that way. And they said, no, this is the assistant special agent in charge of this particular field office. And the board was just floored that that's the capability that the FBI brings, the intelligence that the FBI brings. And so those are the kind of things that you learn by doing exercises that involve everybody.
Yeah, this is ahead of where I wanted to enter it into the conversation, but talk a little bit about how organizations, enterprise organizations, should think about their relationship with the FBI.
Yeah, we are one tool in a broader tool bag, right? So you look at your third-party incident response company, there's value to having somebody on retainer there.
Yeah.
Outside counsel, there's value there as well.
You're not there to replace those folks.
We're not there to replace them. We're there to augment what they're doing, and we're there to take a victim-centric approach. A lot of people, when they think of the FBI, they're going after the bad guys, and that is true. We're going after the bad guys. We're disrupting them, their infrastructure, their tools, the flow of their money. But at the same time, an equal part to what we do, an equal priority, is being a victim-centric organization. It's taking what we know from doing that incident response 365 days a year and applying that to every victim that we engage with. So if somebody is hit by Chilean ransomware, it's probably the first time they've seen it in their environment, but it's probably the 250th that the FBI has seen as far as a victim standpoint. We can bring that expertise to bear when we provide advice, guidance, and intelligence to bear to help them hunt in their network. In some cases, we have decryption capability. If you look at the Lockbit disruption, if you look at the Hive disruption, organizations were able to come to us and say, hey, we've been encrypted by Lockbit, Hive, or some of these other variants. And we're able to say, hey, through our law enforcement authorities, we have been able to obtain decryption capability and hand that to them in the middle of an incident to avoid paying $50 million in a ransom payment. In fact, we've tracked some of the numbers. We're about $750 million in ransom payments saved as a result of providing decryption capability to victims. So we're not the only tool you need, but we are a key tool and probably one of the biggest tools organizations don't think about bringing in early when they're conducting that incident response.
So when an FBI agent, an FBI executive reaches out to a local company in a particular city, it's not a bad thing. Those companies should be open to developing those kinds of relationships because it makes it easier, I think, on the days and weeks where they're experiencing those bad events to have on the ready contact in the local FBI office. So that's not the start of the relationship.
Right. We have 56 field offices located throughout the United States. So we have coverage everywhere. Every one of those has at least one cyber squad, if not, like San Francisco, 4 to 5 cyber squads.
Right.
Each of those teams have very specific expertise in certain ransomware variants, certain APT groups, and they can pick up the phone if you're sitting in San Francisco and talk to the field office in Detroit, Michigan, who might be experts on shiny hunters, for example.
Yeah.
Or they might be able to call the Dallas field office, who's got a very specific work that they're doing on shiny hunters, and get information to you quickly that will help with your incident response, containment, eradication effort. The sooner you do that, the more likely we are to be able to help. The longer you're in that state without contacting the FBI, the less utility there is to it. But we still want organizations to reach out to us. We don't want them to do it, though, when a breach happens necessarily. We want them to do it before a breach happens. And that's why we have those field offices. That forward deployed workforce is to build relationships in those communities so that you know who to call. You're not picking up the phone and calling 1-800-CALL-FBI and trying to tell them, hey, I sit in Dayton, Ohio. Who can I talk to about an ongoing ransomware attack I'm having? Instead, you've built that relationship with the field office, and you know, in fact, in some cases, you have special agents, computer scientists from the FBI already built into your incident response plan. So when things do happen, you've got their phone numbers and you can reach out and contact them.
So most stakeholders don't recognize the FBI's role, not only in the national security mission as it relates to cybersecurity, but that globally there is effective outreach, intelligence gathering, and an understanding of sort of what's happening internationally across the cybersecurity landscape. Talk a little bit about the work that you do to make sure that you're looking at the entire global threat landscape as opposed to just what's happening here in the U.S.
Yeah, so we have 22 cyber law enforcement attaches who sit in 22 locations globally. Those are 22 key partner locations where we know we have effective partners in foreign intelligence services or law enforcement agencies we can work with, or who have unique infrastructure that the actors use on a frequent basis. By having those highly trained cyber personnel sitting outside the U.S. in those spots, it allows us to action offensive capability, law enforcement action quickly, but also to identify and mitigate attacks against US-based organizations quickly. We continue to prioritize that. I'm part of what is called the Cyber 9 Principles Group, and that is 8 countries plus Europol who are very effective at countering cyber crime. We have come together, and every year we build a strategy around how those 8 countries plus Europol will target the cybercrime ecosystem. We set the landscape for that every year, and then we revisit it every 6 months in order to make sure our teams are working together to synchronize joint sequenced operations against the actors themselves.
I remember there being a growing problem around the idea of organized crime being effectively what cybersecurity internationally had turned into. Is that still the case? And like, what's that current landscape look like in terms of your ability to mitigate and or interdict?
Yeah, we saw what was a really kind of centralized ransomware-as-a-service ecosystem when you think about Conti and Lockbit and some of these major criminal organizations where you had affiliate networks and then you had the core ecosystem and you had developers. It's still there today. It's still a criminal enterprise type ecosystem. But since we've done some of the disruptions against Lockbit, Hive, and others, we've seen it fracture somewhat. So these folks now understand that they're not impervious to law enforcement action, that there is no real anonymity out there when law enforcement is persistent in what we do. And so we've seen them fracture. There's still a criminal ecosystem when you look at Scattered Spider, Shiny Hunters, the COM in general. Those groups are less organized crime as much as disorganized crime, in that they are sitting out there opportunistically looking to work with each other where they have relevant skill sets to target US-based organizations through social engineering, through those external, facing vulnerabilities. But it's a little bit less like a traditional organized crime scheme that we saw when we had the larger ransomware-as-a-service organizations.
How do you think about the idea that by interdicting those organizations, essentially what you're doing is you're scattering, at least virtually, the components of an organized element, but at the same time, that mitigation now brings, instead of one centralized entity, now maybe you have scores of actors that are acting independently, or they go and form other groups. Does that make it difficult?
It's another challenge, but it's not any more challenging than what we see with those enterprises. So in the case of Lockbit, 2 years ago, that was the #1 variant targeting hospitals and US-based entities. We conducted Operation Chronos, which really dismantled the Lockbit ecosystem. And within 2 months, we saw, I think it was about an 83% reduction in targeting of US-based organizations based on that disruption. We were able to charge Dmitry Korshev, the leader of Lockbit. We were able to charge half a dozen or so actors affiliated with Lockbit. And really, we broke the trust of the Lockbit ecosystem. And that was really impactful because now you don't see Lockbit continuing to target hospitals and causing, patient diversion in emergency services. So that's compelling. Now you do see them fracture, but when they fracture, we're always watching those platforms that they go to and looking for opportunities to target those platforms. And for us, it used to be, we're going to go after the actors themselves. Now we're still going after the actors, but we're going after their underlying ecosystem. Just last month, I think it was, we announced charges against a major Russian-based bulletproof hosting provider, Medialand, charges against both the company as well as the individuals running it because they were utilized by 17 different ransomware groups. 17 different groups using that one service. So instead of going after all 17, we'll do that. We have to go after those.
So you go after their infrastructure.
The infrastructure, the money, the tools that they're utilizing, the malware, those kind of things, because it has an outsized impact.
So, with my firm Apogee, we help to support many small to medium-sized businesses. Those are the businesses I think oftentimes they're not oblivious to it, but they have this mindset that in the national security realm that adversarial activity from the national security threat isn't relevant to them. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate them on that. Why do you think folks still have this belief that adversaries, the top ones, China, North Korea, whoever they may be, why do you think organizations still believe that there's no nexus to the work that they do or their business?
I hear the same thing from small and medium businesses, and I think the mindset persists that security through obscurity is there. Like, why are they interested in me? Why would the Chinese PLA care about me? I have a shop in Dayton, Ohio. Like, we don't do a whole lot globally. Or earlier this year, we announced a significant operation to counter the Russian GRU. When we conducted that operation, we let the public know it was small office, home office routers that were compromised by Russia's military intelligence service, not because they were wholly interested in what was happening on those devices, because they were very interested in the US IP space that those devices sit on. If you're conducting attacks out of Moscow IP space, you're probably not going to be as successful in the US here as if you're using IP space in Northern Virginia, where organizations trust that IP space. So building these residential proxy networks using that US IP space allows the actors to then pivot into critical infrastructure, financial institutions, government entities a lot easier than if they were coming in from their own devices. So even if you are not a victim per se of exfiltration of the Russian GRU, they're using your infrastructure to target national security here in the US. And that's why we've all been drafted into the cyber fight. We all have to become a little bit more proficient at defending and building resilience into our home and small office devices as well.
One of the benefits I realized from a career in the FBI was this idea that across the risk management landscape, you get lots of experience and lots of different things. So you look at risk, I think, very differently than folks who maybe come up in a particular domain and vertical in the enterprise space. How do you see the overlap of various domains within risk? You weren't always a cyber guy in the Bureau. You're the top guy now. But I'm sure you look at risk in very different ways. And talk to me about the interconnectedness, or like how you see there to be an overlap in either cyber and physical or cyber and other domains.
Yeah, I think, there's been a reticence on the behalf of C-suite executives and boards of directors to embrace cyber risk as business risk. There's not an aversion to, financial risk. Like, they're all over financial risk. Right. They're all over, various kinds of competitor risk. Cyber is a little bit different, and we have to all embrace it as our responsibility. That's the crossover I see, is that in everything we do at the FBI, we have 4 core operational divisions. You know this: counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal investigations, and cyber division. Cyber division, in the work that we do, transcends all 3 of those other divisions. There are terrorists using what we call violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which falls in my team's lanes, to commit terrorist acts. There are spies and criminals that use cyber as a means to an end. So we've got to manage risk across the entire spectrum. That is where we need to see business owners, operators, boards of directors, fiduciaries, and the like start to embrace cyber risk within their organizations as well. They don't have to know the ones and zeros behind it, but they have to better understand risk and risk mitigation to the business itself and take steps to mitigate that risk.
How do you feel that the subject of cyber risk has evolved, say, over the last decade or so?
We've seen a movement towards, the more mainstream use of cyber within the boardroom. You see audit committees who have now are prioritizing cyber. You see some boards who pull in cyber expertise as advisors to the board. I would say we're not there yet, and I talk to a lot of different organizations, both small, medium, and large, and extra large organizations, and it's a work in progress. But we all have to kind of understand where risk is going, especially in the age of AI, where agentic AI, what we've seen in recent weeks, the capability that it's bringing is going to have tremendous potential to impact organizations. We have to start to embrace that a lot more at every level of the organization.
How's the FBI thinking about AI?
Yeah, we're thinking about it 2 ways. Number one, how are the actors using it? That's primarily where our headspace is understanding what the actors' use of AI looks like. And we have, publicly disclosed, I think it was last year, we took down Meliorator, which was a platform being used, an AI platform being used by the Russian government, Russian-affiliated actors, to basically steer global narratives around the Russia-Ukraine war. We've seen industry recently disclose what actors have done. Anthropic, for example, last year disclosed that PRC actors were able to move through the kill chain a lot quicker, where 80% of the operations were conducted through artificial intelligence, through their commercial platform. Now we're moving from commercial platform use to agentic use into offline model use. That's where we're heading next, I think. And so from our perspective, we're trying to stay ahead of the threat to understand how are they going to use it. How do we build intelligence equities in place so that we can alert the public to that? But then how do we counter it? How do we counter it leveraging artificial intelligence as well? In law enforcement, in the intelligence community, We will always have a human in the middle of the decision making when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence. But we can't let the bad guys use artificial intelligence without doing that as well. The director has been very specific and strategic on his deployment of AI at the FBI, both to do data analysis to help us get our jobs done more efficiently. One of the priorities I have for my team that we're working on really hard is how do we leverage it in support of our law enforcement offensive work to basically scale our disruption operations against the bad guys.
Yeah. So folks listening in on this conversation will glean a couple of things, and I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes about best practices or what you want to leave folks with. But talk to me about what you're optimistic about. What gives you reason to be excited about what's ahead?
I've seen a shift in the way industry approaches the FBI when it comes to the cyber work that we do. Historically, we've had industry really look at the FBI for some reason as a regulator in the cyberspace. We're a law enforcement agency, and everything else we do. If you're robbed, if your bank is robbed, you're a victim. If you're a victim of a crime, call the FBI, call law enforcement. Cyber, for some reason, historically, organizations are like, I don't know that we want to call the FBI, right? I think they're starting to realize the value of those public-private partnerships in ways they haven't before. And that's the only way we start to scale our defensive effort and really inform the FBI and the intelligence community's offensive efforts is closing the gaps with industry. I'm optimistic that organizations are starting to do that. They're recognizing what the threat is, and they're recognizing that, for example, the PRC is leveraging industry every day to target us. We have been very public about Flax Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, using companies in the Chinese Communist Party's relationship or Rolodex to basically conduct access operations on their behalf. If we don't embrace these partnerships, which I think are starting to mature here, then we're going to continue to fall behind. I'm optimistic that we're going in the right direction as long as we continue to close those gaps, and that it's not ad hoc sharing, but it becomes more systemic sharing between industry and government.
So think that you're in a room of risk advisors, C-suite executives. What's the last thing you want to leave them with from a conversation like this?
Cyber risk is business risk. Cybersecurity is national security. And everybody in that room has been drafted into the fight. Unfortunately or fortunately, for all of us, we all have to be a part of the solution. If you are embracing cyber risk from a board of director or a C-suite executive standpoint, it's understanding how are we protecting our equities as a business, and then broadly protecting our third parties as a result of that, or who we serve as a third party to, and the overall economy of the United States. What I would do first, if I were listening to this, is I would go to fbi.gov/wintershield. We put out earlier this year the top 10 ways organizations can better defend themselves based on the FBI's perspective in doing incident response every day across the globe. If organizations start to move the needle on those 10 defenses, they're going to become more resilient over time, because in every breach we respond to, at least one of those things are implicated. And I can tell you, some of those are a little bit more technical, some are less technical, but the good thing is for $20 a month, you can drop it into your favorite LLM, the PDFs that we've put out there, and say, hey, I'm a board of director here, I'm a chief security officer here. This is generally what our organization runs. Tell me what I should be asking my information technology and security teams now to understand where we sit with risk. Let that help steer some of your conversations.
Outstanding. Brett, I appreciate you making time for this conversation. I'm sure that folks will glean a ton of information from it, and hopefully it's the start for some for relationships with the FBI. So I appreciate you making the time.
I hope so. Thanks, MK. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of the Risk Apogee podcast. We'll see you guys on the landscape.
Thanks for being here on the Risk Apogee. Every episode, we dig into what it actually takes to lead through risk. And that's the same work we do every day at Apogee Global RMS. Cybersecurity, physical security, organizational resilience, talent strategy. One integrated approach built around your people, not just your platforms. Are you ready to move from reactive to resilient? Visit apogeeglobalrms.io and sign up for a risk-free consultation with our team of advisors.